In this video I'm going to show you how to construct a welt seam. A welt seam is used where you can't use a felled seam on a denim garment. The inside of the garment will have an overlocked edge and you will see the top stitching. A welt seam allowance is usually about 1.5 centimetres on a denim garment. To start the seam, you place the right sides of the fabric together and line up the raw edges next to each other. Use the lines on the throat plate as a guide to make sure that you get an even seam allowance. This is the same as sewing a plain seam. Now we want to overlock this edge so that the raw edges are neatened, and press the seam allowance to one side of the seam. Which side you press it towards depends on your design as to where you want your top stitching to be. We're now going to do 2 lines of stitching parallel to each other, which will show on the right side of the garment. The first row of stitching is an edge stitching to the seam. Line up the inside edge of the foot to the seam line and sew through the outside of the fabric and the seam allowances. Here you can see the edge stitch line, and you can see all the rows of stitching on the inside. Now we're going to sew a parallel row of stitching, and I use the outside edge of the foot lined up to the first row of stitching. Again, this will go through the fabric and the seam allowance. So you have 2 parallel rows of stitching on the outside, and then on the inside you have the parallel rows of stitching are holding down the seam allowances to give a neat finish.